Yeah, for the benefit of everyone here and listening afterwards, thank you to people for tuning in. Obviously, a massive thank you to the panel for being with us. For those of you that don't know about me or my business, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the London Heads of People community, and also run RecWorks, which is a tech recruitment company. So here at RecWorks, we're all about trying to find ways that recruitment can be a force for good in the tech industry beyond just getting people jobs. And what that means is that we're not about getting people their next job, or we're not just about getting people their next job, but we want to help people much wider and figure out what it is that they really have a passion for, and then try and help them level up and push towards that passion. So to give you a taste of what we do, this community is one of 13 different communities and user groups that we run. We've got over 10,000 people split across the various ones. Last week, we made our 3,000th one-to-one mentor introduction, and we've run over 800 learning focused or knowledge sharing events. So I think it's like 135, Dom, you might have to correct me, but 135, 140 this year since lockdown was announced. So we do it all for free, and it's something that we do. We basically get paid by companies to find talent, to find developers, and then we take a chunk of that and drive that revenue back into the community initiatives like this. So LHOP, or the London Heads of People community, this is new this year, so this is our 7th event of the year. And basically, we've just been having interesting discussions, interesting conversations with people, getting a lot of feedback, and then trying to build on with follow-up events. So this one came up from feedback. Hiring is one of those things that's come up a number of times. So that's what we're doing. So today is all about hiring and talent in 2021. So we've got a panel with us today. Guys, I don't know if you're happy to introduce yourself, maybe starting with Marie.
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Marie, and I manage people operations at Learnably, which means that I'm responsible for all things from before people are even candidates or employees. So employer value proposition, the hiring process, talent sourcing, and then onboarding new joiners, internal learning and development, well-being, and all things that sort of relate to people experience all the way through to offboarding and supporting people in their next steps. That's what I do.
Sorry, April, did you want to say a few words?
We've got the classic 2020. I was on mute. Hello, everyone. My name is April Williams. I'm the founder of Candid HR and also a D&I consultant as well. Candid HR was set up earlier on this year to really bring a group of leaders who really want to talk about inclusive culture, and not just kind of a tick box exercise, but actually something that they want to do in terms of bringing people in from diverse groups and ensuring that they have a lifelong career with the organization. So that's what I do. Alongside that, I'm also a co-founder of a platform called My Runway Group. It's been going for 12 years, and it's all about supporting young Black creatives in the UK. We have a shop in Carnaby Street currently open that is all about supporting Black owned businesses. So if you do have a chance, even though we're in tier 3, shops are still open. So if you're looking for some little gifts and stuff, then we are still open with social distancing in place. But most of my career has been in the tech space alongside creatives. So I know all about inclusive hiring in the tech space, from startups right to scale-ups. Those are the clients that I support.
Great, thanks, April. Jack, would you mind sharing a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Jack. I'm the founder or co-founder and CEO of Cooler. So Cooler is a consulting, training and coaching company, and we help mainly startups and scale-ups, also quite a few established organizations. Scale with soul is what we call it. And basically scaling with soul is split across 3 pillars. So we do a lot around coaching and developing what we call conscious leaders. So, you know, leading with courage, creating inclusive cultures, that kind of stuff. We do consulting across the whole people experience, including talent. So working with companies and doing everything from, you know, how do we hire 100 people next year to how do we build, great onboarding, great performance management, that sort of stuff. And then I also have some focus on this, but my co-founder Holiday, she leads the part of our business around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, various different trainings, working on strategies. We did a lot this year of sort of stuff around anti-racism education, which was pretty busy. And then prior to that, I was at Monzo, so did a big sort of scale story as head of talent at Monzo. We grew from about 150 to 1,500 people in 18 months. So that was a fun part of my life, but also probably the most tiring. And then prior to that, I was at Just Eat. So yeah, just kind of spent the last decade working across, tech startups, people, culture, and then for the last year, Kula.
Great, thanks, Jack. Olia, can you complete the set?
Completing the circle. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining, and thank you to all of you who turned on your camera. It's so nice to chat to a few smiling faces versus just us, each other, the list of panelists. So thank you so much for that. I am a people manager at Switchy. What I do is I look after employee experience. So anything to do with how one person perceives themselves as being an employee of Switchy. This is all I care about. I want them to feel amazing, and I want them to have a great journey. So that starts from, the moment they ever saw the website to the moment they leave the business and become the real true champion of somebody kind of who has worked in our company. So something else that I do is I host a podcast called The Modern Employer. And I'm also a part of People Stories Leadership with Marie here, where we are talking about all things progressive people, trying to look at, how to make every employee's experience of being employed better. So lots of exciting things to talk to you all about today. I can't wait.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So seeing as there's a handful here, if anybody has any questions for the panel, obviously you've had a bit of a background now, so feel free to put them on the chat and get involved. Like, ultimately, we just want you guys to get as much out of it as you can. So for you all to get the most out of it, if there's anything in particular that you want to know or ask, then feel free to jump in. Assuming that no one has any burning questions, or just to kick things off. Ollie, I saved you to last for a reason. So you were part of the last panel that we did, and then I know you sent me the podcast to listen to, and it was a great interview about candidate experience. So that's where I'd like to start. So I know you spoke a lot about the human touch as part of candidate experience, and maybe you could speak a bit about that, and then afterwards maybe the panel could join in with any part of the whole experience that you feel is important and effective.
Sure. So I like to consider the basics first when I jump into thinking about candidate experience and offering the human touch. I'm going to throw some really wild analogies at you because just that's how my brain works. So I apologize in advance. But whenever the person starts their experience with your company, that maybe starts from the moment that they join, like they click on your website and they see what you're doing. And when we talk about candidate experience, sometimes we talk about when, the candidate applies for the job and you're like assessing them and you're seeing if they fit your role. And then all of that kind of power dynamic is going forward until maybe they get employed, and like, yay, that's great. But for me, what I'm trying to do is think about the candidate experience in the same way to maybe think about the customer experience. So here's the weird analogy. When the customer clicks on your website to buy a fridge and you actually sell ovens, you don't want that candidate, you don't want that person, that customer, to feel stupid for joining your website, for talking to you in the first place. You want to make them feel so excited about your fridges that the next time when they want a fridge or when their friend wants a fridge, they're going to think about you first, because the way you made them feel makes them feel like, oh my God, you're like the best fridge place for me. So like, how come the customer service people industry got this part right and the talent acquisition is still struggling with this? How come when we consider customer service and the customers joining and exploring the product, we thought about how to make sure that they become loyal to us even if they didn't buy anything? So back to the basics for me in customer experience is trying to think how we want to make these people feel. And when I say these people, I don't mean those like golden nugget candidates that you definitely want for your job. I mean all people. And that's a huge undertaking, right? There is so many candidates that are applying these days. How do you make them all feel good? And I think that a lot of it goes back to identifying maybe your SLAs, how quickly you're going to reply to these people. Look at your messages that you're sending them. What's your tone of voice in those messages? Look at how your interviewers are speaking to candidates and presenting your company. So it's kind of carrying this great experience and great representation of your company, of those wonderful, beautiful fridges, maybe that nobody wants yet, but still kind of getting them through that experience, being excited about just talking to you in the first place, and by no means feeling discouraged if they approached you and then went away with nothing. So I'm just trying to think of candidate experience in this way. I know it's a little bit weird, but here we are.
For me, I completely agree with you. I think that is the best way for me, how I've explained it to clients. But just to kind of add to what you said, is that recruitment doesn't just start when you're looking for a role. And I think sometimes companies get this wrong, is when they're ready to recruit, that's everyone now supports that recruitment initiative. But actually, you're always recruiting. Every day you are actually recruiting, whether it be actively or non-actively, right? So that means everything that you're putting out needs to be of a quality that, regardless if you're recruiting now, when somebody sees your company, they're actually learning about who you are, your culture, what you guys are up to. So everything that you're putting out there is part of your recruitment strategy. So it's not just to wait until you're actively recruiting. And just to kind of use an analogy, as Ala's used, is like the iPhone, right? Apple are always selling, right? They're always selling. So when they bring out a new product, everyone is ready to buy it. Why? Because they followed the story. So if you bring that into a people candidate experience, when you're sharing stuff on LinkedIn or you're speaking about projects or business that you've won as an organization, always remember that as part of your audience, you do have the audience that are either business supporters and also potential people to join your company at your next phase. So that's just something I urge people to always remember, is that you're always recruiting, even if you haven't pressed that active button.
And I was going to say, I totally agree. Like, the human-centered approach is the way to do it. And some like practical ways that I've thought about, you know, how can a company be authentic to itself when it's putting that stuff out? So if you've got that candidate journey mapped, right, you've got like, you know, employer brands you might be putting out, job applications, content that's on your website, all the stuff that's going to be like the first part of the candidate journey. And then obviously going into, you know, requesting for interview, the process, offer, before the next stage. Is I think if a company has its values defined, deriving the really nice touches, those kind of parts of the experience that make them understand what it would be like to work at your company, the values is a really good place to start. I guess an example that might be worth sharing is when I was at Just Eat, we had a value early on that was really about continuous learning. So we wanted everyone who joined Just Eat to be curious, to be a contributor, especially in areas like engineering. So a nice touch that we thought was, okay, let's think about this continuous learning value. Why don't we, when someone starts the experience, provide them with a load of great reading information about the company, the domain, what we're doing. And then when we make them an offer, we had a list of our favorite books. So they were called like our good reads list. And we'd say to the candidate, hey, you know, we have a continuous learning sort of culture at Just Eat. You know, pick 2 books which we're going to send to your house before you start. So I guess it's just a practical example that working out, or if you know or have established like your company culture, your company values, you can really overlay that onto the candidate experience. And then the only other thing that I thought I would share is, I think sometimes it's really difficult for talent folks to provide the candidate experience, or your kind of like North Star candidate experience, if you don't have the foundations to do so. So like, you can have all the will in the world, the nice touches, all of those types of things. But if your process doesn't operationally work and scale as it needs to, then, the basics of the candidate experience, like timely feedback and, automating things, they're going to really suffer. So I think it's important, like if I was, if I put myself in the head of people shoes and I'm thinking about the talent team that I have, I'm going to say, okay, well, what is the sort of MVP of, the technology they need, the ATS, to be able to provide this candidate experience, which we're trying to make candidates feel. Otherwise, I feel like the first one that we've discussed is most important, but the other one is kind of the operational, the mechanics of allowing that experience to happen.
I think that's all very well rounded, and what I'd like to add is around maybe trying to level the playing field as much as possible for candidates to feel like, because the company will have the upper hand inherently in when they're offering jobs, and I don't think it's fully possible to foster psychological safety at a talent level, but it doesn't mean that you can't show that you're trying, so that people know that you're practicing what you preach for when they're joining internally. And then if you're leveling the playing field as much as humanly or technically possible before the journey even starts as a joined journey, then that sort of vouches for your integrity as a company as well. And some things that can be done in order to contribute to that would be as explicit as you can. I mean, knowledge is power. So I can't encourage enough every company out there to just put a salary on your job description, as well as like be transparent about what logic is going to drive your decision-making process, so that people can go and figure out the tools that they need in order to be successful. Because then that means you might have candidates who come from a totally random type of background, but who grab those tools that you're offering and actually prove to you that they are the candidate that brings the most impact and outcome to the job. So an example can be adding your values to your job description, making as much information public as possible. Like if you've got some policies that are okay to share, blog posts as well, not just for employer value proposition purposes, but also really as tools. So for example, saying that I know at Learnably, under the responsibilities section in a job description, there's a little explaining and contextualizing paragraph that does stipulate, look, we care more about what you're capable of achieving right now than whatever brought you into being able to achieve it. Like, we care about outcome, not output. We care about impact, not experience. Now, if you have the experience, regardless of what it is, please leverage it. Like, it doesn't mean your experience is not valid, but sort of, encouraging candidates to engage regardless, and giving them the tools and maybe the confidence even. I mean, I would never have applied for my role initially, which was an office manager position, unless, because, what's the sentence I'm trying to say here? I would not have applied, but there was a disclaimer that said, we know that some people are less likely to apply if they don't meet 100% of the requirements. If you feel like you'd be a good fit and this is of interest, please do apply. And that also helped me applying. So it's an insight in how they approach hiring, because of my previous experiences, I would have assumed otherwise. So leveling the playing field as much as possible to sort of do your due diligence around psychological safety.
So interesting. We've had a few conversations this week with candidates about a client that is hiring, and just saying, you know, what do you think about this? How would you feel about this? And everyone says the same thing, you know, well, I don't have that much experience, or I don't have 3 to 5 years, or something I fit outside of that. And so they self-select themselves out. So I love that little disclaimer, Marie. Yeah, so much good stuff that I kind of feel like I want to pick apart there. Value seems to run through what you all say as part of this experience, like this idea of practice what you preach. That Just Eat example was really interesting, as showing it practically. How else can you do it? How else can you get values across? Do you just list them on your job advert, on your website, on a blog post? How do you give more? Because values are obviously they're hard to define, right? They're not just one line. How do you actually do this? Like if you were giving advice to people here.
Well, Marie, do you want to go?
No, you unmuted yourself way ahead. Go.
Okay. How do you get your values across? So I think values is a really interesting one. I feel like in my experience with companies and values, I've come across a lot of values that are just words on a wall, or some like manifesto document that doesn't really serve any other purpose than to say, hey, well, we've ticked the values box, right? So I think values become real when you look at all of your processes holistically. So obviously we can talk specifically about candidate experience in a second, but you know, looking at that entire like employee value proposition, the life cycle, the people experience from a candidate to an employee to exit. And I always ask myself the question, how do I embed these values, these behaviors, and these principles that we're looking for across all of those processes? And I think there is definitely some power in information and knowledge. So I think your values, if you really have embedded them and you feel like they are real within the company, people are like, as an example, people make decisions. And when they're making a really critical decision, they go back to, well, you know, one of our values is transparency. Let's think about that when we're making that decision. But I think there is definitely some power in putting your values at the forefront of everything. So, you know, documentation, you know, something that's actually a bit more interesting than just like a value in a line, like actually some detailed thought around here are how our values work, almost like you could think of it like a kind of like a case study. Definitely think they should be on the forefront of job descriptions. But again, yeah, the way that I would approach it is map every touch point on that journey and think, how can we make them feel the values? How can we make them tell them about the values? How can we share the values with them? And I think if you can do that and sort of, yeah, every single touch point, ask yourself that question, you'll have a really values driven process.
I think it's perfect that you went first, because what I have to bounce off of what you just said is just the example of my experience on exactly doing that. So for example, one of the learnably values is around radical candor. So how can you let that seep through in the hiring process? Because a value is nothing but just a theoretical framework. So then you have to ritualize it so that it's embedded in the process, and hopefully it drives behaviors that are aligned with what that value looks like in practice. Short feedback cycles are a good example of how you can, you know, weave radical candor in the fabric of your process. And so what we've started doing a few months back is we ask candidates who get to the one of the early stages of the hiring process, what do you think about our hiring process? What do you think we can do better? What do you think about our job description? And sometimes they'll say good things, like on a recurring basis, which is good because you can see what's missing in the good feedback, positive feedback. And then constructive feedback is even more helpful because we can iterate on our process. And also it tells us that those people are confidently engaging in radical candor in a process that like sort of inherently will always lack a little bit of psychological safety because we're in an assessment phase with no safety net. So it proves that the people are, you know, aligned, displaying a behavior that's aligned with our values. So it's a win-win situation. Now, as I said before, we're trying to level the playing field. So it's not just about getting feedback from candidates, but also creating short feedback loops so that we can give feedbacks to candidates. And so we've got a bunch of templates, rejection templates. There's one rejection template for candidates that could tailor their CV more, because that's one of the most common recurring pitfalls, especially for junior positions. We've got one around, people who might be a little bit verbose and too output focused instead of impact focused at the screening stage, because that's a recurring pitfall for candidates. And then once you've got like 4 or 5 templates like this, it's super easy to tailor it and for people to really feel valued as individuals. And I think it links back to your question, Karthika, on how do you handle this high touch, as a one-woman band, because it's Olya and I in this question. And yeah, templates, automating and templates.
Yeah, I think all of you have said some really great things. One thing I would like to add, as I've said previously, is that recruitment doesn't just start from when you're actively recruiting. So when we're talking about our values showing through the candidate experience, etc., it also comes under working with your marketing teams very well as well, and working with other departments that are kind of outward facing. So your, for example, if you've got a team that works on client services, how they work with their clients, ensuring that your everyday values comes through in the service that you provide, is also a way that your values are shown. Because at the end of the day, when someone wants to join a company, they're going to do their research on you as a business, whether it be online. So looking at the content that you're sharing, looking at the content that you are actually producing as well, and ensuring that your values are aligned in that. So if you're talking about radical candor, how does your kind of employment videos or employer branding videos on LinkedIn, for example, show that radical candor? How do you have honest conversations? If you have people within the business that are doing podcasts, which is a really big thing at the moment, right? Everyone is sharing content and producing content. So if you have opportunities like that within the business, even though you're not actively recruiting, how you actually share your story, because we're now in a world where everyone is sharing their story. How you share your story is an opportunity for you guys to actually showcase your values, but in a kind of original way. So it's not just an opportunity to say this is what we do and sell yourselves, but it's actually showing that this is who we are as a business, and these are our employees. And regardless of whoever you meet within the business, they are showing one element of our values, and you can see it from here. So it's really important that talent teams and people teams, if you have the opportunity to work across the business and ensuring that values are working throughout everything that you guys do, that's outward facing as well as inward facing, it's a great opportunity to do so. So I'll strongly encourage that.
I was going to say one very small point that just came up for me is, and this is slightly, I guess in the same context, is measuring how well your values are embedded into your process is super important. So I think in general, if you can measure your candidate experience, usually any candidate that got past like an initial screen, like the first stage interview, whether they then got rejected or progressed, and it doesn't matter what stage they got to after that, whenever they exited the process or were hired, they'd be sent a survey. And a really nice question you can ask in there is, our core values are X, Y, Z. Like, did you feel these values were represented in the interview process and your experience? So I think it's just often when we do candidate experience surveys, we look at kind of like the kind of NPS side of it. But I think getting some more sentimental feedback is a really good thing to do about the values as well.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, when I was at Tech Nation, when we did our values, what we actually did is every year we review our values and say, does this align with where we are as a business at this stage? So being super adaptive and progressive with your values also helps. But what also helps as well is that what we mean by radical candor may be different to another person, right? Let's be honest. Me being honest could be different honesty to somebody else. But giving an example of what that means in practice for your business would help when, like Jack is explaining, when you're looking at kind of quantifying that data. It's saying, if we're talking about being innovative, this is what we mean by innovative. Did you feel that within your process? So just adding a little bit of what that value means to you guys as a business will really encourage and help shape people to understand this is what they're measuring against versus a gut feeling. So the data is more has more of a backbone than just a number.
Okay, great. So I know Karthika's question has been handled here a little bit with templates from Marie and Jack with like the tooling and technology side of things as well. Anything else that you'd add there, or anyone would add there on how to just to make sure we've kind of properly nailed that one and covered it in terms of how you can cover this as a single person, that the busier things get?
I would say, sorry.
Sorry, April. I would say that with kind of considering candidate experience in this process, when you have so many applicants, sometimes, and Marie mentioned it already about that power imbalance. So changing your own mindset as a company regarding that power imbalance is already a big step, but it is a process and it's very difficult to get right the next time you guys go and do your recruitment round. It is something that you can only hope to get better little by little. But one thing that could help, and this is something that I have been kind of trying to do, is try to not consider all of those 800 candidates or however many candidates you have for the role as this material to be assessed. You're not shopping for the perfect candidate. I always try and think of our company as the shop that is selling this great, amazing company to work at. So putting myself actually in the shoes of somebody who has to convince those people that we are good and we are a good company to work at, and we can offer them that place to call their workplace in the future. So kind of rather than making it my goal to maybe assess and sort through people, try to identify which one of them is the best one, I try to look at the responsibilities of my job, look at the responsibilities that people have, and align and help them find a role that would help them best. So creating some template answers, or something that I found actually doing myself recently was writing more detailed feedback to people as they apply. So for example, like one of the first rejection templates that somebody can have is at the applied stage, when you're like, okay, this really doesn't fit, this CV is completely different. And whether before maybe there was a template that said like, sorry, there's like so many candidates and we can't reply to all of you, I started actually manually adding a little line about what exactly was this particular mismatch here and how this person could do better next time. And like even this little piece of feedback, I've been receiving so many letters back, emails back from people saying thank you for this rejection, like thank you for replying to me, thank you for telling me what happened. And this was so heartwarming, just like to see that whenever you're rejecting people, you don't necessarily cause them to hate your company now and be just this one other I don't know, like 30th rejection of their day. Actually, in one of the rejection templates, I explicitly say, I'm sorry if I am adding this email to the list of any other rejection emails you have received recently. This is what I sincerely wish you find in your next role. And this is something that didn't work out for us. Just to be so transparent and add this little bit of compassion into this process.
Yeah, I think also as well, just going back to the question, in terms of having the templates and having these stages kind of outlined and having those foundations, there's some things that can be automated, and there's also an opportunity to be more proactive than reactive. So mostly talent teams are working in a reactive phase where hiring manager comes to you and says, we need to hire X, I want an A-star player, go now, find candidates. But actually, if we're able to shift from a reactive way of working to more proactive way of working, that means that integrating with teams and understanding, for example, if you work in a tech company and you have a product launch coming up in 6 months time, and actually knowing that the team at the moment are at this capacity, there may be an opportunity where you either need to get a contractor or you need to hire somebody in full time. Being part of those conversations help you identify where there may be opportunities where you need to recruit. And that would allow you as the one-man band to be able to actually say, okay, if I'm looking for a particular dev developer, for example, then I know actually this is what the market looks like right now. So if they're looking to hire somebody in 3 months' time, for example, and it's going to take you 3 months to probably hire that role, you know how you can set your kind of recruitment schedule and know when to actually go to market with the role. So being part of the conversations with different departments will also help you forward plan as much as possible as you can, and give you an opportunity to actually see how you can move your recruitment schedule to fit the needs.
One thought to add. So I was thinking about personalized touches and thinking about, when your recruiter has capacity to do so, I think there's firstly something to be said about hiring recruiters that care about candidate experience. So I think that's the first thing, right? Hire people that care about the experience of others and will have that kind of value potentially if that's important to your company, where they won't see it as a material, but they'll see, hey, these are people applying. And then what I started to think about is I was thinking of some of my time spent at Monzo when one of the recruiters in my team would come to me and say, well, I've got 2,000 applications in the back-end engineer pipeline, and there's like 2 of us at the moment. Like how could I possibly go back with a personalized approach? And I thought that, and this isn't something I'd done previously, but I thought for anyone who's on the call who's thinking about things at, maybe outside, like a scale-up type scale or a larger company, that's a great opportunity for your recruitment team to maybe create a doc that would be like open sourcing your top tips for job hunting from your recruitment team. Or, if you have a rejection, here are some of the common reasons that you might be rejected. And here's some advice on how we would, potentially suggest that you kind of look at that. And at least then, even if you can't provide a specific response, you're actually saying, hey, well, we've thought about this and we care. Here's some information. You can take this away and either do nothing with it or it's reflective. But I think it could at least mean that when you're at that scale where you really can't, respond to, especially at the first stage, people in a personalized way, at least you're showing that you've thought about it and that you care. But that was just more like a creative thing that came up in my mind. Very
cool. I love it.
Right, thanks everyone. Sorry, I've kept everyone talking for a long time about this, but the problem is every time someone says something, I just sort of want to pick into it and ask more questions. But I'm going to move on to the next topic. So thank you everyone for sharing there. I'm going to move on to diversity and inclusion. So I know a lot of companies are looking for that quick solution to D&I. But I've heard it said a few times that this one size fits all solution is not the right approach to take. So I'd love to hear from the panel, maybe April, if you could go first on this one, of just specific experiences, stories, and challenges you've come across. I know obviously you've done a lot of this within your work. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, that'd be great.
Yeah, funny enough, I literally had a conversation this morning, one of those interview wash-ups, and we'd gone through a really rigorous recruitment phase where I'm supporting this client to build a more inclusive culture. And I'm really big on using the word inclusive versus diversity, because diversity is your numbers, right? And I always say this is what the board wants to see, and that's how you quantify how you're moving and how you're measuring your inclusive team. But inclusion is more about, regardless of what characteristics you're trying to bring into the organization, everybody that's applying for this role should be able to have access to this role. So we've gone through this and we did blind recruitment, and it came to a point where we've got a candidate and we were just torn. We've got everything in place. We've got the blind recruitment in place. You've got you've sent the role out to so many different job sites that ensure that your talent pool is inclusive as much as it can be. But it got to a point where you have to bring the people side into it. And this is where the values came into play. And everyone on the panel was talking about culture fit, saying, this person, we don't feel like they would fit with our culture. And I said, there's two things here, and I'm really big on this. There's a culture fit and there's a culture add. Now, as an organization, you have your non-negotiables of what you can't move on. This is whether it be the kind of clients that you serve and how you serve them, etc. That's your non-negotiables. And your culture fit is almost like I kind of explained the mean girls in school, right? If you look a certain way, you talk a certain way, then you fit in with that group, and that's their non-negotiables. But actually, if you look at a music group, right? If you look at a music group or a choir, everyone is singing different tones, they're playing different instruments, and they're making a beautiful song, right? And that's the culture add. Regardless of what you have, if you can see that this person can add value to your business and they fit in with what you're offering, there's opportunity there to bring someone from a diverse way of thinking versus their ethnicity, their age, etc. So that's one thing that I've always encouraged my clients to think about, is that culture add piece. When everyone is saying that they don't fit in culturally, then there's a question there. Are we trying to hire someone that is literally like us within the business, or are we trying to add value and scale what we have in place? So in terms of what I offer to my clients and what I speak about all the time is, first things first is how you're defining the role. What words are you using, how you're actually describing this role, and where you're sharing this role. If you're sharing it within your own community, the likelihood of you actually touching a wider community or a community that you've not been engaged with is almost, the chances are quite slim. So when you're looking at how you're defining your role and where you're sharing your role, you need to think about who within the business has access to other communities that they're willing to share there. So that's one thing. And in terms of if you want to look at the words that you're using and how you're describing the role, there's many tools online that helps with that as well. So I would encourage you guys to look online for tools that work on that side of things in terms of the language that you're using, ensuring that it's inclusive. Another thing is how you shortlist your potential candidates. So again, when you're looking at how you're shortlisting your candidates, what criteria are you using? Are these kind of questions that are closed questions and it is a tick box exercise and saying they must fit X, Y, Z? Or actually, as Marie explained it learnably, it's saying like, we're looking at the impact, we're looking at the outcome versus what you did previously. So again, how you are contextualizing, how you are putting your candidates into the pools and your screening stage is really important. And that's where you would see the difference between, even if you've gone out to a wide pool of people and you've got that really strong talent pipeline at the beginning, if you are not being inclusive in how you are screening those candidates, then you'll see a big drop-off rate at that point. So then that means when you're looking at your numbers, that is one of the barriers that has stopped you or decreased your chance of actually bringing that inclusive group that you built at the beginning through the process. Another thing is the interview process as well, is how you are training your hiring managers to actually ask questions. And I always, one thing I've done in most of my companies is we've built up a team of interviewers, one that focuses on the culture side of things, the culture add side of things, and another team that is skills-based focused. So they come from the actual teams that you're recruiting for. And what it allows is that there's not one pressure on one or two people to make the decision, but actually it's a group decision that is made, and it allows people to look at certain things and come together in the wash up to discuss all those different elements that you're looking for within this person. Alongside that is, again, is that bias training. All of us have our biases when we're recruiting. So being able to identify the biases that you have alongside how you're putting your interview panels together also helps as well. So if you have a group of people that have identified their biases as they have a bias towards age or ethnicity, and they're all on that same interview panel, then the likelihood of that person being able to actually shine through that interview has decreased, because the whole panel understands their biases and they know that they're all biased against one thing. But actually, once you've had that conversation, about these are our biases, when you're coming to putting your interview panel together, picking people from different bias groups almost helps to alleviate one-sided of the panel as well. So those are the key things that I would say are the barriers to inclusive hiring. So once these are kind of addressed and there's processes and training around that, hopefully that should alleviate your barriers to inclusive hiring.
I'll just pick up on that, Jack. I know you've unmuted. I know you've got something to add here.
Raring to go.
I know. I'm sorry. So I love the choir analogy as well. Absolutely love that. Really helped make it clear. But these two interviews that you say were, one's, if I understand this correctly, you've got one side that are more looking at the skills and the other side that are looking at the culture fit, culture piece. And then you do the wash up afterwards where everyone fights. How often is there a universal agreement? How often is there disagreements? I was just interested to get your experience on that side of things.
Yeah, so when you have these two panels, and this is more for companies that are innovative and in the mindset that they are all on board and building an inclusive culture. Because, for example, recently I've worked with a tech team where the CTO was like, well, they don't have these skill sets. And you had the culture team saying, but they would be a really good add to our business in terms of bringing everyone together within the tech team and be able to kind of engage us to come out of being kind of secluded from the organization. They have that experience of working across products. So sometimes there's a clash there. Now, what happens in those clashes is that it slows down recruitment. So right at the beginning, before you're actually interviewing, this is where that whole mindset training comes into play. And each department, you know, it's like looking at one picture and looking at your strategy from different points of view, right? So marketing's inclusive strategy may be in terms of the language they use, in terms of how they're promoting marketing, how they're marketing outside, but tech may be in terms of the skill set that they have within the business. You have people that have either worked on tech that has been historical and have that level of understanding on that, and then you have people that have an understanding of new technology coming into the team, and that's how they may see inclusivity. So being able to establish what the business means by diversity and inclusion, and then working with different department leads and saying, okay, so what does this inclusion mean to you as a business? Taking what the business has said and bringing it into your team, what does that mean for you? And establishing what that means within their recruitment as well. So if it's saying that the business is talking about they want to have an inclusive culture, and that means that they're focusing on recruiting from a BA/ME background. Okay, so then what does that mean for you? What are the barriers within tech that slows down or doesn't support bringing in people from that community? What are the things that we can do there? So then that helps kind of inform the culture group what they're looking for as well. So they're looking at, okay, if we're looking at hiring from this inclusive point of view, and this is what the tech is experiencing, then these are the things that we can do to help, and these are the things that we're going to be measuring against. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that, April. Jack, sorry, and cut you off there.
No, just no worries at all. Just a 2-minute point to say, I really echo what April says, and I kind of wonder why, like, SEO and Google search, we're still, or just like industry, we're still calling it diversity and inclusion, because one of the things that I picked up that April said, which I just wanted to kind of reiterate and I really agree with, is inclusion comes before diversity. Like, diversity is the statistics. So it's all well and good, and there's so many studies, like you can Google and take a look, of companies that were like, okay, you know, we're going to hire 30% of our software engineers and they're not going to be men, right? They're not going to identify as men. And then they go out and they achieve that through whatever, you know, money they throw at it, however they get their recruitment team to campaign it. And then all these people who don't identify as men come in as software engineers, and they're like, this isn't inclusive, and they either have a terrible time or end up leaving, and, you know, it's not good for anyone. So, I mean, just to echo that point, that, like, I really think inclusion and education comes before you think about bringing in diversity. If you're in a situation where you happen to not have the most diverse team, whatever characteristic you're looking at. So just to sort of echo that. And then the final thing, because I know we went into quite a bit of depth around like culture interviews, a practical thing that I've done when it comes from, okay, we've got these values and the behaviors, we've defined them, we've started to embed them. How do we create a culture-based interview that anyone in the company can do and is a really strong indication of what we're looking for? And what I've tended to do is bring people together throughout the company from different levels. So you might have a working group where you've got a junior, an exec, mid-levels, engineers, marketing, finance, legal. So mix up the groups and take those values and say, okay, if we've got this value on a whiteboard, let's put the behaviors around the value, some of which we might already have. And then what questions, whether they're competency, evidence, experience-based, or like scenario-based questions, can we ask to test these behaviors? And I think if you do that and then create kind of like a master values interview, should we call this, and say one of your values was to help everyone belong, you could do it for that value. So then you can start to test inclusivity in terms of your cultural interview. But yeah, I find that as just a workshop structure is really powerful. And then whether you're Notion, Confluence, whatever it is, have that in a place and get everyone doing those interviews in the company and, you know, retrospectively looking at how they're going. And I think you can create, you know, I would say probably Monzo was the place I saw this work the best, but, you know, the values interview was super strong, especially like in the early days of the company.
I'll jump on the back of that one again to add a specific example of how I'm currently working on this. Well, it's actually been implemented for a while now, but we do have a value specific interview, and +1 to everything that you just said. It's hugely helpful and insightful. So as I touched on before, we're not looking for culture fit, but rather for value alignment. So there's 4 overarching questions, and I hope no one's applying for a job at Learnerby here because I might be sharing a lot of information. No, I'm just kidding. So there's a few overarching questions that the hiring team asks to the candidates. And then we don't want to necessarily be testing for interviewing skills. We want to be testing for potential outcome. So we have overarching questions, and then we have a bunch of follow-up questions that helps the interviewer drill down on the answer of the candidate, which might not be necessary if the candidates are very like verbose and talkative. It might, however, be helpful for people who are more, how do you say, there's the, oh, I'm losing this word. Introverts, for people who are more introverts. Oh my God. Yeah, so don't test for interview skills. That would be unhelpful. And then we always have, so the question doesn't directly ask about a value, it tests for the value. And then the answer doesn't matter as much as the elements that are part of this answer. So as a random example, if your value is radical candor, and then you ask about you decide that your overarching question is, tell me about a time that you had to share upwards constructive feedback, and the person answers, then you might be looking for elements like, did they also ask for feedback themselves in the process? What did they implement on the next iteration of the project they were working on based on the feedback that they gave and they received? Did they make it a psychologically safe environment before anything even happened in the first place? So these elements are what matters, not what the story actually is. And that's how we might be able to test for values and see in the behaviors that people are describing what values motivated their decision making, and then see their own ritualization of their internal values through the interview process.
Yeah, I think with all of this, what's great is that there's so many different ways that you can do it. But first and foremost, when you're coming to actually implementing it, you do have to take some time to articulate what this means to you as a business. And training does need to be involved in this. So just writing a guideline and giving it to your hiring managers and just being like, yep, go forth and hire, it's not going to work in these sense, because there is There's a stigma attached when we're talking about building an inclusive team, because there is pushback from hiring managers in terms of it is hard work. What does this mean? Can't somebody else do this, etc. And there's always, and in this as well, you have to look at your own biases as well. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable for some people, regardless of their background. It could be due to their experience, whether they've been in that position themselves or they know someone who has been in that position themselves. So you are working in a space where you do need to kind of build that psychological safety net first, and then the education piece comes into play with a follow-up on a regular basis. If it's a case of updating your processes to ensure that it's inclusive enough, this feedback loops from candidates is really important. Making sure that everyone understands what they need to do as well, and how you're changing the process as well, is so important. So I encourage my clients to do this on a quarterly basis. Have a review on what they have in place already, what's working, what's not working, and what they can do to change it. But first and foremost, there does need to be an education piece around it, and a support system as well, in terms of that if they're asking questions or they've come from an interview and they're like, oh, I don't know how that went, what do you think? Giving them, and that's part of the psychological safety, giving them a place where they can have these conversations in terms of saying, yeah, that went well, or actually, you know, this is what you can do to improve on those sides.
Everyone, thank you so much for all these answers. I honestly feel like I could stay on here until 5. Though I know I'd probably be the only one. So thank you very much, or at least I know I wouldn't have any panelists left. Thank you for joining us. Do we have any final quickfire questions? Feel free to just pop them on there. We've got about a minute left to answer. I think we're in the clear. But panelists, if there's any other links you'd like to share, if you could do so afterwards, we'll forward that out to everyone that signed up and everyone that was on the call. This will go out on YouTube as well, so we'll forward a copy to everyone that signed up. But no, thank you for being with us, and again, just thanks for being here. It was so interesting. So have a great Christmas, everyone, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thanks for joining.